Welcome back to Under the Plate, and we've finally arrived at episode 30, turning the page, and what better way to celebrate than to discuss one of many people's favorite characters, being Zack Fair, and his potential role in the third and final title in the remake trilogy. Today I'm joined by Payne, and Payne, let's just dive right in.
So, uh, the first thing that jumped to mind was I was gonna say spoiler alert, but I'm not sure if we've ever really cared that much about spoiling Final Fantasy VII in this
No,
series.
I don't think we have, because honestly, if we're talking about part 3 stuff, we kind of just infer that you've, played the entire compilation.
Or at least we sure hope. I mean, you
Yeah,
can just hop on the internet and see how many people haven't played even the original.
it's quite obvious. I mean, I don't know if, off topic, but there were quite a few people who were confused that Sephiroth was born in Nibelheim on Twitter last week. So, yeah.
Yep. But man, we'll just say we're always very inspired by the internet when we make these videos. So to really kick things off, however, so the ending of Rebirth, we've discussed it time and time again, has a bunch of the world stuff, and Zack is like the central character of all those moments, but at the end, he just kind of is in. We're not quite sure what sort of world he's in or what this is really going to mean for him.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because, the final chapter specifically, and not even just the final chapter, but like the entire interlude in Rebirth, it's called A World Apart. And that kind of chronicles Zack going through these different worlds. And he ends up in this one sitting in the church and says, what's to say that the worlds can't reunite again? And I think that, that's pretty indicative of what's going to happen in part 3, that he's going to obviously reunite not only with Cloud and the party, but Aerith in particular, because, the entire whole section of Rebirth that had him like chasing the yellow flower petals, I feel like is pretty, using a lot of imagery of, him reuniting with Aerith after so long.
I feel like that line, the who's to say that they can't be reunited or be one world again, I feel like that's making a lot of people jump the gun and be like, oh, everyone's gonna be like alive at the end. But
Right.
I'd say this: all the worlds connect through the live stream.
Correct.
So I think that's really where this is gonna lead. Like, I think it would be actually insane if they did go with some weird merged multiverse world thing, but I don't think that's in the text anywhere. Everything in Final Fantasy VII revolves around the themes of life and death, and it's all connected through the life stream. Like, all the lore is connected to it. Omega, the weapons, this entire universe is set around this. Even the new additional lore for the Gi, it's all about the life stream, and so are the worlds.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and I agree. I mean, I think that, there have been people that believe each of these worlds wants to combine as one. And, in a somewhat of a, literal sense, maybe, but I think more importantly, the big picture should be that it honestly doesn't matter what world Zack ends up in, because if his journey follows what it did in Rebirth, he's going to be continuing to hop in more worlds. To me, and this is just to me personally, I don't think where Zack ended up was what the developers wanted us to take away from that scene. It was the fact that Zack is safe and has the knowledge that he can reunite with those people again. And I think for that, that's setting up in part 3 to where potentially, right? Because to be fair, there is stuff that we can talk about with the world that he ended up in, being that, there's a chance that Aerith is there and he can reunite with Aerith, and the two of them are going to go try to help Cloud and the party in the fight against Sephiroth. But I think, generally, the takeaway for this is Zack's purpose in Rebirth was to showcase how worlds work, right? That was the whole point of it. It was to show the idea that we've talked about in previous episodes about worlds being manifestations of desires or dreams. I mean, Aerith herself, it's my dream. She refers to her world as that. And I think that that's going to be, that line of thinking is going to be key when it comes to understanding how Zack is going to navigate forwards in this third part.
Yeah, I just really think, because we still don't have like everything laid out about the worlds and how they
No.
connect and the life stream and everything. All we've mostly been left with is what we can infer from what the game shows us, and then, a lot of the snide stuff Sephiroth says to like Cloud and like that white rainbowy space when they're falling and talking, or even like, the clouded eyes line. Like, this is all clearly building up to what the truth of these worlds is supposed to be. And I think in part 3, Zack's going to be seeking like almost like his truth of these worlds, or the truth of them, or how they connect to the life stream. But I feel like there's something very hidden and integral, and I believe Zack or Cloud through Zack, or any number of things really involving Zack in this. Well, honestly, this will be a new set, is what I'd figure. I think it'll be just trying to really get down to what all of this means on that level.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's pretty correct. And we did actually have developers like Hamaguchi-san has already said that Zack is gonna have a pretty sizable role in part 3. There was a community event. It was in December after the Game Awards in 2024, and I actually was there. And there was a fan there, a Zack fan, and she had like the Zack Play Arts figure, a Zack shirt. It was just the biggest Zack fan ever. And she asked Hamaguchi, about Zack, and he basically was like, he thinks that Zack fans are going to be happy with what's going on in part 3. And I definitely think that, in terms of his role in Rebirth, he definitely had, a sizable amount of screen time. But I do think that there's a chance he might have a little more, maybe a little less, but I think he'll have a little more, especially considering the ending. But yeah, I mean, he's going to be this key piece of the puzzle, I think, to really kind of giving the player the ability to see through the lens of someone within the live stream versus someone from outside of it.
And connecting like this topic back to like our first one of like, where did Zack end up and like his purpose in Rebirth? So here's like an actual spoiler alert for like Mother 3, because it just kind of crossed my mind. Because I feel like, like you were just saying, Hamaguchi's like, Zack fans will be happy. And you can just hop on YouTube, Twitter, wherever, and just see so many people still hung up on that idea we brought up earlier of just people coming back to life or whatever. But Mother 3 is a game. It's very good. I highly recommend figuring out how to play that, even learning Japanese if you need to. But that game has like a somewhat ambiguous ending, almost like the original FF7 in a way. However, on the end screen, as an Easter egg, you can walk around. Like, you can't see yourself, you can't see any NPCs or anything. It's just a black screen that says, like, the end, ? But you can actually check on all these characters and see that they're still all right after everything. Like, you don't really know what the future's gonna be in this case, but everyone's okay. But with a plot device like the live stream, like, especially if like Sephiroth's influence is removed from it, like him and Genova, I think that will be a happy ending. Like, everything is working how it's supposed to, and like, this all just ties to Advent Children, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Because that's a world where they're trying to like have a stronger connection with the planet. They're limiting things like materia use. they're not using Mako, they've swapped to oil, which, obviously in our world, like, we know how that resource can go. But that's still better than eating up, the life stream, the actual, for real lifeblood of this planet. So all of this, I believe, is just leading up to not some combined worlds. It's just everything's gonna be okay. I think that'll be the ultimate theme of this trilogy, really.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think that it's going to be interesting to see what angle they take with the content for Zack, really. Because, I agree. I definitely think that, I mean, Kitase has said, like, happy ending and stuff like that. And, I feel like people, touching on that, like, I feel like people read that too literally, right? Like, to me, I think that the ending of Final Fantasy VII is pretty happy because despite all of the troubles and the losses that you go through during the game, you were able to save the planet and live on. And I feel like that's a happy ending. But I know that for some people a happy ending is no one dies or stuff like that. And again, that kind of boils down with perspective and interpretation and just depends on how individual players feel about things. And for Zack specifically, talking about everything will be okay, the one character that I think obviously ties in the most with him, as we mentioned, is Aerith. And, they have talked so much about that in terms of, commentary within the game, right? Just the number of times Zack has, the Flower of Reunion, the scene with him, and the interlude sequences. It's just really building towards that. I mean, he tells Cloud to save her, which, as we know, probably didn't happen. But at the same time, I think with Zack and Aerith in this third part, linking that to Advent Children, we see them help Cloud in Advent Children. And I think that their role in this game, once Cloud is able to clear his mind and, understand who he is and, the true nature of reality, clear the clouded eyes, as we say, I think that they're going to be critical in allowing that to happen. And obviously, we've seen scenes in Rebirth that highly resemble Advent Children, right? Like, we've talked about them, again, with a lot of this in previous videos. There are scenes in Advent Children that have a white background, symbolizing inside the planet or whatnot. And we saw multiple scenes of Zack and Aerith doing that, right? Multiple scenes of Zack and Aerith with a white background inside Rebirth that eerily matches Advent Children, and that's not by coincidence.
Of course not. Like, this is going to be such a big thing. Like, part 3 is going to, I believe, truly make everything in the compilation make sense, because they're building up to what I think they're finally just really telling everyone how deep the life stream really goes.
Right.
And I'm going to bring up how you were talking about how the original Final Fantasy VII is a happy ending for you. Like, it's definitely ambiguous with the main cast, which I feel like is what a lot of people get hemmed up on.
Mm-hmm.
But, the goal of the game, like, Aerith's mission, ultimately everyone's mission was to save the planet. It just deepens and has a bunch of other things going on as the plot goes on. But the core really is, like, them trying to save the world. And truly, no other Final Fantasy has quite kind of explored it in that way. Like, of course, all these games end with some level of saving the world. And even something like FF16 has, like, a flash forward.
Right.
However, FF7 just, that's like a 3 or a 500 year jump at the end when they
years. Yeah.
500 years, and you see just everything that they had worked and strived for is still living on. You hear the laughter of children. You see Red 13, like being part of an endangered species and having offspring. Like, there's so much beauty in it. And yeah, in the original game, you didn't know what happened with Tifa, Cloud, anybody. But everything they did was for a greater purpose and worth it and was what they all wanted, even Aerith.
Right. Because, again, like, I think that you kind of have to step back and look at, like you said, the goal was saving the planet. It was something bigger than themselves. It was stopping Sephiroth to prevent the planet from getting wiped out by Meteor. It wasn't, hey guys, like, I want to save myself. It was something bigger than an individual. And again, that ambiguous nature of Final Fantasy VII, that was never attempted before, in Final Fantasy 1 through 6. It was the only game like that. And while there have been ambiguous elements following that, Final Fantasy VII as a whole kind of stands out as this game that, until Advent Children and the compilation came along, it was really kind of just up to interpretation on whether or not the cast survived or lived.
And I can understand some people maybe having problems of it going beyond that. Like some really hardcore fans that truly appreciate this ambiguousness. And they're probably also Inception nuts. But really, like, them going beyond that, even in the compilation, it just all feeds back into itself.
Right.
And gosh, the trilogy has just been combining everything. And I almost feel like, obviously there's a meta narrative going on with the world stuff.
100%.
But its goal is to connect everything and make everything whole again. Kinda like a certain hollow person we know.
Agreed. And, jumping back to Zack, I want to talk about something that we'd kind of toyed with earlier, just thinking about, his role and what might happen during it. And something that would be interesting to me is kind of seeing what character reunions potentially will happen. I mean, we already talked about Aerith a little bit, but I personally, I would love to see him and Cisne reconnect. Because, that is one of my favorite, connections and relationships that occur in Crisis Core is seeing him and Cisne interact. And, it was so great to see her back in Rebirth. And I don't know how they would do it, to be honest with you, but I would just love to see her show up more in Part 3 and potentially get the chance to reunite with Zack, considering that, she literally stayed to watch over Gongaga because she promised him.
So that's making me wonder. So clearly in these worlds, there's people that are still alive because they're, these things are implied to be figments or dreams. So I wonder if there could just be things with Zack tying up some loose ends for himself in a way in these worlds, so maybe he could have interactions with Cisne like that.
Right.
Or if they just really go all in on making every side quest a banger in Part 3, I think having maybe a quest before, I don't know how that could be really explained, but definitely after, Cloud gets, his memories back and is, more stable, I wonder if he could have, a moment with Cisne actually talking about Zack.
Yeah. That'd be really interesting. And I think that it's gonna get, again, it just depends on how they have Zack traversing these worlds, because again, they could just take the simple approach of, his purpose here is to showcase the worlds and how they work. But again, if the worlds, being these manifestations and born when fate is breached, quote unquote, if their goal is to kind of show Zack almost denying his death, because we see in all of these, worlds, he's evading Shinra troops, he's, running away. And it's it almost kind of makes you wonder, if he's there, denying what happened to him, denying the death that hit him. And that's why we continue to see the Shinra troops or, characters that have not accepted their reality yet. So I think that would be interesting. And if that is the case, and they kind of take the approach of, Zack doesn't, because again, I don't think he does. It's made pretty clear. He's yeah, all of a sudden, I was just here, right? And for me, it's I almost wonder, if the goal is for him to accept the fact that he is dead, or, his reality, quote unquote. I think there's no better person to do that than Angeal. And so I really think I could see
Bro.
Angeal returning in part three, not for a major part, but just to be the hand on the shoulder for Zack to help guide him. Because, that was Zack's mentor of sorts at the beginning of Crisis Core. And, unfortunately, when he died, like, obviously that was a huge, the turning point of the story for Zack. So,
There's just so much they can really do. I think there could be an interesting dichotomy because they kind of do it in Rebirth a bit, where there's like side stuff that mentions Zack or like alludes to him. I
right.
think they should keep that up in part three, to where we could have moments like I said earlier with Cisne. But man, this really comes up with a lot of stuff with the worlds because, gosh, tell me you wouldn't just eat straight out of the developer's hands, like a scene of just Angeal and Zack having some sort of consummation, or like just real moment in these worlds. Because
Wow.
in Rebirth, it really was just. I think you're right. Zack might not quite understand that he's dead, because he's definitely the type to just keep going and try to make a difference no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much what he's doing in the interlude segments. So almost I don't necessarily think this is going to happen, but I feel like some of this world stuff is going to have overlap with Cloud getting his memories fixed.
Agreed.
So I'm wondering if possibly, like, what if Zack finds like really like settles into like he's dead and completely realizes it, but he's in Cloud's world, like memory world, so he's like experiencing all that not really for the first time, but like refreshing him on it as Cloud finds out.
Yeah. No, that would be really interesting. And, I think that scene, so Cloud remembers Zack, but Cloud's version of the narrative is that, like, Zack was another soldier there with them, or not even a soldier, like a trooper, right? He flipped places with Zack, but Zack died in the river, is Cloud's recollection of the events. That's just not accurate. And so, obviously. And so, it's interesting because in the original, like, he didn't even remember Zack. And so, obviously, since Zack has a role here, they had to make him remember him somewhat. And he is, aware of Zack. He recognized him at the end of the game when they fought Sephiroth. But even then, I think the most interesting part of that is the fact that he still, doesn't get the connection that, I'm not the first class soldier. I never was. That was Zack. And so I know, that whole moment happens in the live stream where, in the original, with Cloud and Tifa in the live stream, and the pieces kind of get unraveled. We learn about Zack. We learn that, this is the guy that was the one who was really the quote unquote hero at, the soldier at Nibelheim. It wasn't Cloud. And I think that still is going to happen in the live stream. But I've definitely seen some people suggest that, like, Aerith and Zack are going to have this huge portion of the live stream, and it's going to be all these characters in there with Cloud. And I don't personally agree, solely because I think for his development and for Tifa's development, that scene is critical, and I just don't see the development team messing with that. However, I do think, as we mentioned, after the live stream sequence, like seeing a flash of the live stream with, like, communicating with Zack and Aerith, like in Advent Children, I could totally see. But more importantly, I kind of wonder when Tifa is helping, fix his mind. We saw when she fell into the live stream, the fact that the planet is, just fighting Sephiroth and this influence of, negative live stream in a sense, right? It's fighting that under the surface. And so I almost wonder if, like, Zack and Aerith are going to be, like, protecting the two as they're trying to fix his mind.
There's really so many ways they could go about this. Like, because I wonder if there could be like some type of additional element. Like, obviously there will have to have like Aerith and Zack involved in that scene, even if it's on the outside of the box, so to speak. So I'm wondering what could be going on with, like, possibly, we had the black and the white whispers. I wonder if there could be something with that going on then.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, like, I think I might have been onto something with, like, this overlapping idea. Like, I don't, because I think you're completely right. I don't think Zack, Aerith, or really any other character in the game needs to be over involved in that live stream sequence, because that is so integral to Cloud and Tifa, just like you said. So there doesn't really need to be any direct involvement. But I think they might use this chance to, at bare minimum, flesh out some of the scenes that Cloud goes through in this, like, mind palace thing as Tifa walks around and, sees all this stuff. So I'm expecting some level of expansion on that. We could probably get a lot more. Crisis Core gave us a bit more between Cloud and Zack, so I wonder if we could maybe see some of those scenes, like, recreated or re-implemented along with, the lead up to Zack's death and Cloud taking his legacy inadvertently.
Right.
But I think you're completely correct. That's just a scene that doesn't need to be unsullied with, like, a bunch of extra stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, we talked about the fact of Zack and, being there with Cloud. I think for Zack, like, he's definitely gonna have a conversation with Cloud, and, like, when he says in Advent Children, like, I am your living legacy, like, I can totally see something exactly like that scene happening, where Cloud, like, gets his memory back. He's just beat up about it and realizes what happened to Zack and all this stuff, but Zack's there, giving him the Buster Sword and being like, and having, like, a passing the torch moment of sorts. Like, I can see something like that happening of, not only Cloud learning to accept the fact that, he's not just fighting for him, he's fighting for the legacy of the people before him, of Angeal, of Zack, etc. But also for Zack to kind of accept the fact that, it's in Cloud's hands now, as he has, accepted his reality, right?
Because just something like that would make so much sense. The live stream itself is all about legacy. It's the legacy of the planet. And they tie this in through so much in the characters of Final Fantasy VII. Like, obviously, just like you said, like, Cloud is Zack's living legacy, and then Zack has a predecessor in Angeal, and then just all that even connects back to Sephiroth as, like, the first soldier. And you see legacy through Tifa, because how she learns martial arts, and she kind of picks up what she does in honor of her dad. Aerith's an ancient, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And Barrett kind of had, like, a bit of a legacy moment where, rather than, like, Dyne literally giving Barrett, like, his legacy in a sense, like Zack did to Cloud, it's Barrett protecting the legacy of his friend through Marlene. So
Right.
this is just so ingrained in the story that I think that will probably still be, like, the key moment for Zack, where maybe he actually does really get to pass on his legacy in a way he wants to, and just obviously he stays there for Cloud even when he's, in another weak mental state, like in Advent Children.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really is just going to be, like, this happy ending that they're hinting at is going to really just hammer home these themes of legacy, because that's Final Fantasy VII, and that's what these remake games are all about. And there's really no better character to do it through than Zack.
Absolutely. And, I want to go back to a specific phrase that you mentioned earlier, like talking about the live stream as, like, a layer upon layer, like a layering. I think that's just a great way to look at it. And again, it's going to be really interesting to kind of see the progression of how that ends up, influencing the final fight. because, I think, I don't want to say anyone with a brain, but anyone with a brain, I feel like can kind of get the idea that this final fight against Safer Sephiroth is probably going to be, 5 hours long, and every character is going to be there. Like, Aerith and Zack will be there from the live stream. The entire party will be there. I mean, who knows who else might show up? You know what I mean? So I think that Zack's obviously going to have a role in the final fight, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, considering that, he was playable and he was a critical part of that final fight at the edge of creation in Rebirth.
Like, honestly, I just trust these guys to make something interesting or amazing no matter what. However, I think it really has to be something special or unique, because I'm afraid that it would end up feeling too samey to the end of Rebirth.
Right.
Like, I think Zack is obviously going to have more than, 3 or 4 abilities. So I think just another fight like that would be more interesting, just from, expanding Zack out a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's going to really make it hit is having, one of my favorite parts of these remake games has been the mid-battle cinematics. Like, it's still one of the most impressive and cool things I've seen in a game to date. Just how the camera freely goes from gameplay to battle to a cutscene in the middle of battle, back to a fight. So I think having those key interactions during those moments, just like the end of Rebirth, are gonna be what sells it. Just because we already know through interviews that they cut Rebirth's final boss fight down significantly.
Right.
So
yeah, it definitely got cut. I mean, they said that it was like way longer.
So I think one of the reasons they probably cut it, like, beyond just like some play testing or pacing things, is because they were probably like, you're probably right, this is going to be probably a 3 to 5 hour final segment that's going to be blasting you with battles and story and characterization and just wrapping everything up. Like,
No,
I think some of these
agree.
I think some of these key moments of Cloud and Zack that we kind of just like theorized about a few minutes ago, honestly, this final fight would be a perfect place. They could even have that mirroring of, an Advent Children, like, complete the scene that they added where Cloud's just getting trounced by Sephiroth, and he's just beat, he's bleeding, he's been stabbed, but then just, the white background, Zack, like, lifts him back up pretty much like, hey, you've already beat him once.
Right. And I want to say, like, with the white background, there's also the black background in the original game. And that shows up with Zack, right? There's this one scene where this is in the middle of the, huge boss battle against, Bizarro Sephiroth. And it's, like, where Zack is standing in the church in the field of flowers. And there's this lone, like, spotlight on him with live stream coming off of him, and he, like, reaches his hand out, and there's, the flower, Aerith's flower, right? But there's a scene in the original game at the very end, one of, the big FMV at the very end of the game, that has Cloud standing in a white space with live stream swirling around him, and there's a spotlight on him. And that's right before, I believe, Aerith, like, you see the hand reach out, and he gets pulled back into reality with where Tifa's holding on to him, right? And it's like, to me, again, that's just another parallel to showcase that, like, what we're seeing isn't, this new mind-blowing stuff that's never been done before. It's retooling and recontextualizing what we saw in the original game, but, making it more clear and adding layers to it.
Like, that's just truly what this entire trilogy is at its core. And I feel like people just aren't really understanding that. Because this really all does go back to, like, hey, guys, this stuff has been here since day one. Day one. And I know some people might get a little fired up of me drawing these Kingdom Hearts connections, but In my opinion, Kingdom Hearts is Final Fantasy.
Yeah,
Just
I
through
mean,
and
I
through.
I understand that.
And this just lines up with a bunch of things that series has done with its characters and storytelling. But another big thing that a bunch of people don't get about Kingdom Hearts is its use of like symbolism. Like I've seen people react to the opening of like Kingdom Hearts and be like, why Sora falling through water? Like people just some people just cannot look at an artistic shot or presentation of an idea and they just can't connect the dots. Like the numbers aren't written on each dot for them, and they're not willing to even try. So that's just really what all the live stream and head stuff in FF7 is. Like it's both happening and sort of not happening, if that makes sense, just because of the spiritual nature. Like it's
Yeah.
ephemeral and strange and fills the heart.
No, absolutely. And again, everything here that is presented in this game, I know obviously that there are so many questions and a lot of anxiety about whether or not it's going to stick the landing. And I mean, I think that's totally justified considering that, there's a lot riding on, you know, the scene, the iconic scene at the end of the game and the changes that happened with that at Rebirth. How's that going to play out in part three? There are people that, feel like, okay, well, you said that there's changes, but there's not. So what's happening, that are upset. And then there's people that feel that, you know, just they're not happy with the direction or they're worried that it's not going to work out. And I completely understand that. But I will say, like, from everything that's been presented so far, I have 100% confidence that the development team is going to be able to put something together both memorable and special, considering especially that everything ties in with the themes, right? We talked about this from the very beginning of this episode. Life and death and the concepts surrounding that are the crux of Final Fantasy VII. And, we've dove in before to Jungian psychology, Buddhism, all this stuff that, is interjected into the lore and the writing of the remake trilogy. Yogacara, the eight senses, all of this stuff. And all of it's coming together to revolve around these same themes that were in the original, just amplified to 10 and packed in with the compilation. So, I have no doubt that there is going to be new stuff. I don't think we're going to get a one-to-one exact ending, but I do think that what we get is going to be, something that we could absolutely understand going from the end of Rebirth to the end of Part 3. It's going to make sense.
And just like you said, the main themes of Final Fantasy VII are life and death. And the thing that hangs between life and death is legacy, because everyone only has so much time. And that's something Final Fantasy VII Original especially communicated very strongly. Like, you lose the Avalanche bunch unceremoniously, because just sometimes lives are snuffed out before their time. And then there's Aerith. But I think the reason Rebirth has chose Zack as the interlude character to explore the themes of these worlds, and I think honestly deepen his character along the way, is because of his unique relationship in the story with life and death. He wasn't really a martyr in the same sense as Aerith ended up being. He just had his own dream and his own thing going on, enough so that they made Crisis Core. But he formed a connection with these characters in his life and had his flame snuffed out early, just because he was trying to always do what he believed was right. And all he had left to leave was this legacy. That's all he had to his name, to his life, his hopes and dreams. And we already know how dreams connect to the worlds. And Zack's such an important character because of the legacy he gives to Cloud. And honestly, just part 3, I believe, will just really hit the nail on the head with that, and cap things off and give Zack exactly what he deserves.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And to be honest, I don't think I can wrap it up better than that. So, with that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 30 of Under the Plate. Be sure to let us know what you're hoping to see from Zack. If you're a huge Zack fan, and what are you thinking that's going to happen with his character, especially with a potential new interlude segment in part 3. But again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.